They served during the height of the Allagan Empire's campaign of conquest, the Third Astral Era. The region of Ilsabard is one of their targets, and thus, the besieged Hrothgar deployed their most elite soldiers. They broke through the line, destroying powerful Allagan long-range weapons, shattering the enemy's guns. The legacy of those soldiers lives on. This is the story of the Gunbreakers in Final Fantasy XIV. My name is Stout, and I really hope you enjoy. We don't have the luxury of consulting the Encyclopedia Eorzea for the Gunbreaker job. That information will likely come in the third volume of the books, so we'll piece together this story using everything available in-game. Let's begin by going back in time, when civil war raged among the races of Beauja, a region in the southern reaches of Ilsabard and to the west of Dalmasca. This bloody conflict only came to an end when the land was united under the rule of a queen. Gunhildr is the name and title given to that role, and all who followed would inherit it. Bozja was accepting of the various Hrothgar tribes who struggled in isolation. The Hrothgar are the animalistic feline race added in Shadowbringers. Hrothgar are divided into two clans, the Hellion and the Lost. The former served under the queen's rule, and the latter are a much more nomadic clan. Beauja enabled the Hellions to grow and prosper with Rogadin and Hurs who also lived there. A vast majority of Beaujan queens were Hrothgar, given they boasted the largest population in the region. Beauja's establishment as a nation was the only reason the Allagan Empire didn't conquer that land. Queen Gunhildr's direction kept the Empire at bay until the Fourth Umbral Calamity. It's in this era that the legend of Gunhildr's Blades begin, the Queen's most elite fighting force. Hrothgar soldiers who wielded unusual weapons with great precision. They broke Allagan firearms effectively. That's where the name Gunbreaker comes from. Now, Hrothgar have passed the art of the gunblade from generation to generation, so even though the most legendary gunbreakers served the queen, the Lost also knew how to wield them. The gunbreakers of that time made their home in the Beauja Citadel. It was the palace of the queen, and even after Beauja fell as a nation, the citadel remained. Survivors did slowly rebuild, and Beauja was reborn as a city-state. It would coexist for centuries to come, though it was nowhere near as prosperous as it once was. The citadel remained until it was destroyed in what's known as the Beauja Incident. You learn more about that by completing the Beauja events in-game. Radovan is a Hrothgar gunbreaker who appears in Shadowbringers and serves as a mentor for the Warrior of Light during their training. He considers himself the last of the gunbreakers due to the Order's strict rules regarding the exclusion of outsiders. Well, until he meets the warrior, that is. We'll circle back to his story in a minute, but I want to mention him now because he gives us the details on how his gunblade works. The gunblades that gunbreakers use are not like the more common models we see in the Garlean Empire. Radovan tells us in the quest, The Makings of a Gunbreaker, that the model he uses is the genuine article. The Empire uses edged weapons with a firearm bolted on. Radovan says they pale in comparison to his. That's because gunbreaker weapons use etherically imbued cartridges in battle. Pulling the gunblade's trigger ignites the powdered crystal and releases the ether inside. That sends powerful shockwaves through the blade and increases its destructive power. But it's not just limited to offense. These cartridges can be fired into the air as defensive barriers. The gunblade is not an easy weapon to use, and I'm not talking about the number of actions Gunbreaker has per minute compared to the other tank jobs. Radovan mentions in the quest Hired Gunblades that it normally takes a lot longer for a novice to use a gunblade over a normal sword. Speaking of abilities, the Gunbreaker's actions reference a few characters in the franchise's history. The job is inspired by Squall Leonhardt and Cypher Almasi from Final Fantasy VIII, and Lightning from Final Fantasy XIII. Many actions like Blasting Zone, Rough Divide, and Solid Barrel are based on Squall's limit breaks and attacks from the Dissidia games. The abilities No Mercy, Bloodfest, and Demon Slice are moves used by Cypher. Also, the moves Nebula and Royal Guard reference mannerisms by Squall and Cypher. The former is Squall's stance when using his limit break Renzo Kuken, and Royal Guard is a taunting motion we see Cypher perform. As for Lightning, the female Gunbreaker's idle stance is the same as hers from 13. Traditional Gunbreaker attire usually involves longer coats. Let's take a look at the bodyguard's artifact armor. Besides being stylish, these coats also offer utility and space to store etherically charged cartridges. Plated armor is worn underneath the coat. The set also comes with plated gauntlets, boots, and a monocle. Now let's circle back to Radovan's story, given he's one of the few Gunbreakers we encounter in the story. Radovan is a traveler from far north of Ilsabard and a former unwilling soldier of the Garlean Empire. He was forced into servitude as a conscript. That's because they held the Hrothgar's wife and son hostage. The Garleans forced him to fight for them, or his family would die. He followed orders for a while, until one day during a mission in another province. Radovan disobeyed a direct order that day, and was thrown in jail because of it. He was fitted with a Magitech collar that the wardens could use to shock him. This was common in Garlean jails. He was approached about working for the Empire again for his freedom, but Radovan refused, and so the torture continued, leaving him with shocks and intermittent paralysis. They kept Radovan in that jail for 10 years, but he had not lost hope. Every night he dug a few inches, playing the long game for freedom. Little did he know he was digging in the wrong direction. A decade later, Radovan burrowed into someone else's cell. Sophie is a Viera and former Dalmascan Resistance group member. She was in jail awaiting execution. The commotion of Radovan's attempted escape worked up the other prisoners. Radovan and Sophie used that noise to escape, an opportunity to find Radovan's wife and son. The pair snuck their way to the Beauja Citadel, the home of the Gunbreakers, the place he'd last seen his family. They would be there, but when he arrived, they saw nothing but the desolate remains of a once great palace. Like I mentioned before, the Citadel had been accidentally destroyed in Project Meteor. Radovan's wife and son were gone. The two reasons he had clung to life all these years, no longer in his grasp. Radovan breaks down. He sees no way forward. The only thing to do now is join them in death. Radovan is prepared to take his own life, but Sophie stops him and renews his hope. That's when the pair resolve to head south into Eorzea. Radovan is a classic example of the "my greatest failure" trope. He holds a lot of regret for not being able to protect his family and queen. This clouds his mind so much that he later prepares to take vengeance on a Garlean scientist who had defected, someone who was trying to turn their life around. The warrior steps in, of course, and Radovan wrestles with his conscience, but ultimately overcomes his desire for revenge. Radovan later tells us that he didn't intend to kill the scientist, only to have him confess of his sins, but he acknowledges that that would have put his integrity into question. I mentioned Radovan believes he's the last of his kind, but we know that's not actually the case. Thancred Waters, one of the scions of the Seventh Dawn, wields a gunblade beginning in Shadowbringers. He's unique in that he cannot manipulate ether, so he needs assistance with charging his cartridges. Reen assists with that in Shadowbringers, and Y'shtola and Urianger take over that role in Endwalker. Another surviving Gunbreaker taught Thancred the way of the Gunbreaker. That's Rostik. Eventually the warrior brings the two Hrothgar together. Rostik wants to rebuild the homeland in Beauja and restore the Gunblade order, but Radovan has found new family in Sophie. Besides, much like how Rostik taught Thancred, Radovan is passing the Gunbreaker skills on through you. He wants to take on more students so that that legacy lives on. Radovan's code of ethics teaches us much about what it means to be a Gunbreaker. Soldiers who form strong bonds with their comrades, fiercely loyal to the ones they serve, honorable men and women who carry themselves with integrity, pride in their homeland, even after its fall, and perhaps the most important one, hope for the future, even when everything seems lost. And that's the story of the Gunbreaker job so far. We'll likely get more information when Encyclopedia Eorzea Volume 3 arrives, and when it does, I'll be sure to update you on the juicy details. So what jobs lore do you want me to look at next? Let me know in the comments, and if you like this video, subscribe so you know when new videos come out. Take care, warriors, and I'll see you next time.